it seems obvious now, but at the time you're like, could you really call this thing soda? It's obviously made very differently. It's a really different type of liquid. So the first thing was a credibility check. Could it even be done?
Welcome to Any Insights Yet? The podcast that explores the intersection of strategy, inspiration, and branding. I'm Chris Kocek. In today's episode, I sit down with Mark Lester, co-founder of Squint, a brand consultancy that has helped brands like Nike, Netflix, and Olipop find their happiness advantage. During our conversation, Mark breaks down the happiness advantage, the framework they use at Squint for helping brands grow, and he shares the aha moments that came out of their research for Olipop. He also highlights how those aha moments led to packaging design changes, partnerships, and brand activations that have helped transform Olipop from a sparkling digestive tonic in health food stores into a nearly $2 billion soda brand that you can find in grocery stores across the country. We also dive into Mark's work with Nike, including his research around Gen Z's fraying relationship with competitive sports, and why collaborative games are becoming increasingly popular. To get things started, though, I asked Mark about his first aha moment, and it turns out it came to him in song form. What's the first time you remember noticing something where you were like, doesn't anybody else notice this? What was the situation, and what did you notice?
I think it was band lyrics, It was like desperately trying to understand what Paranoid Androids by Radiohead was about, Or, I got very into David Bowie because he was very sophisticated in his lyric writing. I'd be talking to someone to be like, do you know Ashes to Ashes is about heroin addiction and references a character he created a decade ago. So I don't know if those were big ahas in the way we were describing the industry. It was just that sort of that really nerding out on pop culture, in a deep way. And, you would always find a couple of kids who shared that passion, when we go deep on those things with you. And then a lot of people being like, mate, you're just overthinking this thing. What are you on about,
No, I think that's great. That's a great example because I think that's the first time maybe for a lot of people, usually, in middle school or teenage years, where you start to realize, I think there's another layer going on in this song. I think this isn't just about this. There's something else going on here. And that, of course, serves you very well in strategy and in marketing because you're always trying to figure out what's really going on here. Oh, very interesting. Song lyrics as a gateway to strategy. So speaking of which, you have an agency called Squint, where you've helped a variety of brands, including Nike, Netflix, Olipop, Daily Pay, among others. But before we get to those examples, I do want to ask you about your agency name, Squint. What's the story behind that?
We were looking for a term, a word that was just about taking a bit of a sort of a fresh look or an unusual look at things. But we also had this sort of brief to ourselves, which is we wanted a short, fat word, we wanted it to be short, fat and fun was what we were saying to ourselves. And we just felt there was a lot of brand consultancies out there with very formal names. That's not what we wanted to be, We wanted to take the insight, fun and creativity of ad agencies into the brand consultancy world. We felt some of that skill set could be moved upstream and needed to be moved upstream. So we wanted the name to signal that. We had a lot of people telling us, and good friends who loved us, saying, don't name the company this. It's a terrible name,
Really? You were advised against Squint?
No, a lot of people did, but we always really believed it. And it's funny now, but at the time, people with great intentions be like, don't, you'll undermine the mission of the company. People won't take you seriously. But we were like, well, we want to introduce ourselves in the terms that we want to be introduced in, which is we're insightful, we're imaginative, and that's the nature of the relationships we want to have.
Well, it immediately gives me a visual of somebody taking their glasses off and leaning in and squinting so they can see something much more closely. And I think, talk about a symbolic name to make people say, look, we look more closely at things.
And I think sometimes you just need all great guitar solos have some minor notes in them, some notes that don't quite work. And you just need something that's it's worth paying attention to.
Were there any other names that got left on the cutting room floor?
Bahookie is one, which is, it's Scottish slang for arse or bottom. And there's actually our holding company name is Bahuki, but no, we were like, do we really want to have to explain what this means to people? Squint was a very clear winner. There was no viable second candidate.
That's interesting because, if you've got the right product market fit, you can call yourself whatever you want, right? So, nobody knew what Google was or what it was referencing when they first came out, but it's so good at what it does in terms of search that nobody cares. They just Google something. Yahoo, of course, at one point wanted to make everybody have that feeling when you find the thing you're looking for.
They're fun to say, Google and Yahoo. The logic is important, but also this sort of visceral experience of the word is important, and sometimes you can rationalize yourself out of a great name, can't you?
Mm-hmm. I love a good naming exercise. Your agency has helped transform Olipop into a $2 billion brand using something that you call the happiness advantage. So first of all, in just a sentence or two, what is the happiness advantage?
The happiness advantage to us is understanding what the fundamental drivers of happiness in any category are and organizing a brand around it for commercial advantage. And we're not trying to argue that this is an original thought in the world of branding. All the best brands have effectively found their path to this. But what we were trying to argue when we introduced it is, one, it's not done sufficiently well upstream. And even in places like creative agencies that have historically grappled with these things, it's just not implemented in process well enough. Like, how many times do you actually sit there and say, have we audited what delights people within this category and what frustrates them? So we really wanted to entrench it and make it the focus of our company. We thought it was a timeless truth. And we also thought that it was a timely one in the nature of the sort of unhappiness crisis that we live in. So for all of those reasons that I described, became the sort of founding principle of our company.
So take me back to the very beginning with Olipop. Olipop launches in 2018. The original packaging says sparkling digestive tonic. It's doing okay, but it's not exactly catching fire. Then Squint comes along around 2021, and you join forces with Olipop. And one of the first things you do is you go on a hike with the founders.
Yeah, and particularly this was with Ben Goodwin, one of the two founders, and super interesting because this was a transition moment for me in my career of going from working with, large corporate organizations like Heineken and, founders of very different animals, and so even the first meeting being a hike in California was just a very different experience, very unstructured conversation. A lot of what Ben wants to understand is your values, as a human being, which, feels very exposing, honestly, for coming from the corporate world. The thing that Ben was passionate about was prebiotics and gut health, a really deep sense of mission around that. You end up with a very deep conversation about public health, how people make choices and your values. I think I about survived on that hike in terms of keeping up with the conversation. I think at times I was very disorientated because, I was used to meetings with agendas and, all the above. So I think to begin with, I felt very exposed.
It sounds like something from a TV show. People would be like, no, their first meeting wasn't out in the Hollywood Hills. Now, his co-founder is David Lester. You're Mark Lester. Do you think it helped that you share the same last name as one of the co-founders?
David and I are brothers, yes.
So what was the original challenge that Ben and David came to you with? What did they think their biggest problem was?
So all those guys at that stage, when you're so they're a sort of $50 million a year business, and those are the hardest yards to get through. But they're all thinking the same thing for a packaged good founder, which is, I'm succeeding in a specialty store. I want to get into mainstream retail. They really deeply believed in the difference that getting more prebiotics into people could make. And they wanted to make it easy for people. And we just said, what is the way that we can get this so that it's not just a somewhat successful item at Whole Foods, but a very successful item at Walmart, CVS. At that stage, they hadn't done any consumer research. So the conversation was very framed around what are the retail buyers telling you that they want? Retail buyers are great and very smart people, but they often get stuff really wrong.
Right. Oh, we've got plenty of experience on the CPG side. And Retail buyers are great. They know what's going on the ground in certain ways, and there are certain things they're looking for. But in the world of CPG, you've got to have another perspective as well if you want to catch consumers. And it sounds like you guys really wanted to cross the chasm from natural to mainstream. What did you think their biggest problem was that was holding them back?
We always had hypotheses about how much people wanted a health drink. Kombucha was doing very well at that point. But, you always had this thing of how big is gut health? You could see there were sort of signals in where it was fit. The liquid was great, but was the way that the thing was being packaged. There was a sense that it was just wasn't quite in the right slipstream yet.
It's funny, when I think about brands that get started, and again, we've worked with a lot of brands that are in the natural food space. It reminds me almost of the primaries in a political season where it's okay, you're just playing to your base here. But after you win the primary, if you want to go mainstream and take the nation by storm, you're going to have to appeal to a wider group.
It's a great analogy. And I think a lot of what happens is as you're coming through a Whole Foods, they convince you of things that, if you're not careful, can limit your ultimate potential, even within Whole Foods itself.
So Whole Foods was the first big retailer that Olipop was in?
One of the first ones, yeah. It was a series of Whole Foods, Erewhon, all those kind of specialty health stores.
Now, I want to keep going with Olipop, but before we keep going, I do want to ask, are there certain questions that you like to ask clients at the beginning of a new project to help crack things open or create a perspective shift?
The two big questions for us are always, what do people really love about this thing? And what frustrates them about it? We have a more complex framework that we take into research, which is we look at four things, which is associations, habits, beliefs, and memories. When you're saying what do people love about this? If you're thinking about association, what are the other things that people love that this is like? What would they associate with? If you're thinking about from a habit standpoint, what is the thing that they do that makes it lovable? What are the important elements of that ritual? What belief does it reinforce for them in the thing that they love doing about it? Does it make them feel better about themselves? Or does it cast up a memory that's positive for them? And if so, what kind of memory? So again, that sort of associations, habits, beliefs, and memories, that's sort of a big part of our happiness framework of saying those are techniques to get deeper.
Were there any negative memories associated with drinking Olipop?
What we came into was an exploration of different types of framing of what the product concept was. So if you take two of them, tonic and soda, the fundamental associations behind a tonic is a health drink. And actually, both prebiotics and tonic had some negative associations with folks because it makes it sound like it tastes like shit.
Hey, would you like a tasty prebiotic drink? It's got prebiotics. Yum.
Exactly. So that was, and with taste the number one driver, effectively, you can overboard on your health messaging without realizing you put yourself in a not tasty category. Some of the stuff around prebiotics and gut health, for some folks, they're sounds like I can't drink a lot of them because I'm going to be over full or I'm going to poop too much, not necessarily negative, but it's a limiting belief. Whereas one of the things we had when we're testing a sort of concept is, do we have permission? It seems obvious now, but at the time you're could you really call this thing soda? It's obviously made very differently. It's a really different type of liquid. So the first thing was a credibility check. Could it even be done? And the answer to that was absolutely. People most intuitively, naturally saw it as a soda because it had some soda flavors in there, like root beer. And so people were very happy to associate with soda. And soda just runs so deep in America. There's regional pride and different forms of flavor. So it's a very emotive subject. But what people would always bring it back to was childhood memories. What was interesting was this 3-year-old brand was getting a lot of credit for things that happened when these people were 7 years old. Because again, at that stage, there wasn't tons of soda flavors, but there was a few like the root beer that were creating the architecture for those associations. And it was I remember mowing my grandma's lawn and having a can of root beer on the porch afterwards. And I remember a feeling of being loved, safe, and at home. And that's what everyone described. That was the sort of emotional construct for them. And so when we were comparing these different constructs, it's just like, there's a clear winner here. Like there's one of these is a happiness concept, others are health concepts. And we were like, the happiness concept is going to win. But, people told us we want the thing to be branded like cereals were in the 80s. We just want it to be fun. We did a Minions partnership. We did Barbie. We created Yetis for the Christmas. We talked a lot within the group of like, what would Coca-Cola in the heyday have done? Like Coca-Cola in the 70s. We really went and wanted to go and attack like a very classic soda playbook. And we just felt like with the functional innovation of the beverage, it just needed to get mapped into that existing memory space in American consumers' heads, which in some ways traditional sodas can't do anymore. They can't own wholesomeness because people know that it's bad for them. You've seen them jump around to all different types of spaces in their positionings to try and cope with that, whereas a wholesome beverage was able to kind of come in and occupy that space.
Well, what attracted me to Olipop initially was just the fact that it has so few grams of sugar, right? And sugar became public enemy number one. I guess it's been that way for a little while. And that was also what was driving a lot of people to just the sparkling waters, right? The Waterloos, the LaCroix. Is it LaCroix or LaCroix?
Well, I think everyone's got their own spelling. Do you think that's one of those brands like Pan Quotidien or whatever, where you're like, no one knows how to pronounce the brand? Like, surely, it's been such a great success, but surely that is a bad brand name because you either sound pretentious being too French or like an idiot,
Uh-huh.
To your point, one of the things we did was restructure the health messaging. And for most folks, sugar, low calories were the biggest thing. Prebiotics was third or fourth, depending on how you cut the data. So like a more general, wholesome, and things like fiber become quite important because I think part of the functional health revolution is it's not just about taking stuff out. It's about the idea that there's good stuff in there.
Oh, absolutely. It reminds me of like Dave's Killer Bread, which, here you've got this thing, bread, which is just a useless carb, right? It's not giving you anything. And I call them like product plus, where basically they're plussing up the product so that now it's got fiber, it's got seeds, it's got protein, like who knew bread could give you so much? And of course, Dave's did that and Olipop did that in the soda space. You mentioned associations a second ago. Let's do a quick word association game. What were some words or phrases associated with sparkling tonic?
Tonic was always the operative word there. It's health, it's pharmacies, and everything to do with health. It's good for you. And then on the flip side of that, it's bad tasting. That was really the whole, it's a health and good for me, bad taste map.
And it's medicinal. You mentioned the pharmacies. It's interesting that soda fountains began in pharmacies because it was this thing to promote health. How far we've fallen, how far we've come.
They were giving people cocaine and out of these soda fountains to make them feel better. It was interesting. Yeah,
the original energy.
The tonic's loaded with all those things, and it's alienating to most people. Like they're just like, I don't think I would want to drink a tonic.
And then what were some of the words or phrases associated with soda that were vastly different?
Soda is love in America. It's home, warmth, it's comfort, it's safety. It's exceptionally emotive. You get this really interesting mix of relaxation and stimulation. It does both. I don't think we've ever found the right way to describe that. But yeah, everyone goes back to childhood memories. The word home just comes up a lot. And that's home. What home is it's when you didn't have worries, you felt loved and safe. That's what soda still takes people back to. And that's still the winning proposition in soda. And your ability to go and occupy that space is the thing that propels you to the most success. It's certainly the clearest, best business path in. And so, for us taking a tonic and putting it effectively into the soda mainline, we've got to embrace and love what soda is really about in America.
So you move Olipop into the soda category. That's a huge shift in terms of the competitive set. And now it really kind of feels like Olipop and Poppy are the new Coke and Pepsi of this generation. In February of 2025, Olipop was valued at $1.85 billion. And in spring of 2025, Poppi ends up getting acquired by PepsiCo for $2 billion. So you guys are running neck and neck. What would you say is the difference between Olipop and Poppi?
Well, first, I'd say there's some pretty fundamental differences with the liquids. So I would encourage everyone to go and read the back of those cans. And obviously, I am not impartial, but I would say they are branded very deliberately, I think, to look very similar. The underlying liquids are very different. So that's one thing I would bear in mind. When it comes to sort of brands and associations, the Coke Pepsi parallel is perfect. And really, that's what consumers understand. They understand Olipop as the sort of classic, traditional, wholesome brands. And they understand Poppi as the young, trendy brand. You ask people, like, how do you describe the differences? You know, they expect Olipop to show up in a way that's like intergenerational and like inclusive. And, you know, there's things that they think it shouldn't do, you know, as the sort of like more adult. And they see Poppi as the sort of slightly brasher, more sort of trendy, out there one.
Right. And you've also got Liquid Death getting into the mix, also valued around $1.5 to $2 billion. They're starting to take some shots at prebiotic beverages. I'm sure you've seen the ad that came out recently that just showed people sitting in a toilet stall, a bathroom stall, and they're saying our products won't make you go to the bathroom. Do you feel like the competitive set is shifting again?
Not yet. Obviously got a lot of respect for Liquid Death and what they've been up to. I don't think it's not a significant part of the commercial landscape, of this category right now. It'd be interesting for a brand like Liquid Death, which that has very much not been their proposition or their reputation, as they move into space, how they fare. But every man and his dog is having a go at it, and as you know, Chris, the vast majority won't succeed because it's not as easy as it seems. Would Liquid Death be the one I would back? I don't think so. Personally, I think for the reasons I've outlined, I think it's too big a transition for them. It's still a young market, so certainly something disruptive could happen.
For sure. So let's switch gears and talk about another $2 billion brand that Squint has been part of. It's in a totally different category. It's something called Daily Pay. And for our listeners who may have never heard of Daily Pay, what exactly is Daily Pay in a couple of sentences?
So Daily Pay does exactly what it says on the tin. It gets you your pay, or some of your pay, every day instead of every 2 weeks. And it's particularly important for hourly wage workers or blue collar workers in America. So it's really a service designed for folks that are living paycheck to paycheck who would potentially like more flexible access to their money. So but the reach of it's called the earned wage access category. It's enormous now. Like if you know an hourly wage worker, they will know these services. And Daily Pay has about 70% of the market. If you work at Target or other supermarket, if you're a nurse, those things are a super important part of the pay landscape now.
Mm-hmm. And you discovered something in the research that was really interesting and quite powerful, actually. What was it?
As you can imagine, with a service like this, there is a danger that a limiting factor becomes it is viewed as non-aspirational. Like effectively it's viewed like food stamps, It's a great service, but not something you want to be seen to be a part of. And they'd actually done a ton of great research on this stuff. We didn't do any original research. We just audited all of the research that they had. And one of the things, it was a case of a client not necessarily realizing the power of their own data. One of the things that we came back and showed them was people didn't actually take money out very often. It was only, I think it was on average less than once a month. But what most people were doing was checking the bank balance once a day. And often it was a thing that people did in the morning. It was basically a thing that you worked, and by the next day you could see the money go in. And there was no rational reason to do that. Like you know how much is going in. It's a repeating pattern. But people really talked about how transformative that moment was for them. And if you've got a job where you're working for a large organization, you feel like a small cog in a big machine, like any sense that you're bringing power back into your own life is enormously powerful. And so it had this enormous sort of emotional effect on people. And Daily Pay is an incredibly popular service. Like its positivity rating, I've never seen a financial product with anything close to it. It's Like it has a 4.8 on the App Store. Like it's got like an 80% positivity rating. Like it's great. People love it. So we were like, this is the template. And if we unpack what is powerful about that, it rebrands you as something that is not remedial in nature. It's not about running out of gas money and needing more cash. It's about an optimistic sense that your hard work does pay off and can move ahead in your life.
Mm-hmm. So how did that finding that you just talked about, it's somersaulted into a more compelling creative, right? So this finding led to more compelling creative. What was the creative execution before? And then you just mentioned where it went as a result of this. So can you paint a picture for me? What would an ad for Daily Pay have been like before you tapped into this happiness advantage framework?
Daily Pay was probably, I think, a 10-year-old organization at that stage that had mainly grown itself through like B2B sales, like selling into the likes of Target, and then effectively email access to the employee base. So they never really had, like they had some performance-based marketing, they had some social, and they had their sales decks and website, which are really still their most important, comms channels, in many ways. And so part of our remit was to introduce a brand platform for the first time. Part of that was priming the organization for what a brand platform was, what it was about, and how it could influence all of the things that I've just talked about. So that hard work pays off in the daily. That was the brand platform that was developed. And we worked quite closely with them on a partnership strategy, which led to the sponsorship of a load of stadiums, sports stadiums around the States. And for us, like that just became like the perfect vehicle for this message around hard work paying off. But also the sports stadiums were great spaces for them because of the employees that they had working in there. And so part of what the team was actually able to go and do, this is Daily Pay's internal team, like they create these great moments, which were actually about celebrating the best employees at the sports stadiums in halftime moments, all under the banner of hard work pays off in the daily. And like what we're really kind of proud about that work, I think, is that like it just became about celebrating hardworking employees and their progress. A big transformation for us from a sense of something quite remedial to something very optimistic, positive, and reinforcing a belief that if you work hard in America, you can still move up, in the world, which we know is a belief that's under attack.
You've also done some exciting work with Nike, specifically around youth sports and refugees at the Olympics. Do I have that right?
Yeah, well, so we'd sort of come into Nike talking a lot about the happiness crisis. There was a few teams there where that thinking really resonated as a thought piece, and one of them was the Purpose team. And they were working on a brief at that time, which was really thinking about, Gen Z sort of fraying a relationship with sport. I think, it's well documented that like sport participation within the US, is overall declining. Like sport doesn't quite have the stranglehold on aspiration with young folks that it kind of once did. And they were sort of thinking about how to use the Olympics as a springboard to reinvigorate appeal and connection with a younger generation. We did a number of, bits of research within Gen Z and talked to folks about what was frustrating them about sport as they understood it and the things that they really loved about it when they got it right. And I think what just emerged from that really clearly was you can push competition too far. And for a generation that is exceptionally anxious right now and is in the midst of a health crisis, an anxiety health crisis, more pressure is the last thing they want. So other spaces like video games are not necessarily putting them under those kind of pressures. They're easier places to go and relax, So this sort of traditional, quite confrontational world of competition for a lot of kids could really alienate them. But the thing that they really loved about sport was a sense that it can build your resilience. Like, they can create skills for you outside of sport, and actually there's things you can learn within it. And again, it can create a hopeful belief that actually, even if you're feeling a bit overwhelmed right now, you have it within inside yourself to deal with those challenges. And sport can help you find those capabilities within yourself.
Was there anything else about Gen Z's changing relationship with sports that stood out to you in the research?
Well, one of the things we ended up talking about quite a bit, I suppose, through this was the nature of ambition and success. And I think this could be a contentious topic, because I think if you talk to older folks on this, they're like, they lack ambition. And we're always trying to present this within the voice of Gen Z, where they're like, we think your system is broken and we don't want to play by it, And that became a big thing, because I think even in the sport, within the sports infrastructure, it was like, do you want to win the skateboarding competition or do you want to become a skateboarding YouTube creator? Like, is the competition the important thing, or is the real thing not to win it, but to participate a bit and spin off and create a really successful YouTube channel? And, obviously like Nike's an aspirations-based company. And so the nature of ambition and aspiration is really central to them and does shape their relationship with sport. I mean, there's an overhyped view that, they don't admire athletes anymore, which plenty of kids who love, famous athletes and footballers. But there is this nuance in what success means to them, what achievement, and that sort of, that message of just sort of sticking to the playbook and working your way through, like, it's not always exactly what resonates with kids these days, I think.
Well, it makes me think about like cutthroat competition. There's quite violent imagery in certain competitive metaphors. And I wonder if we're moving into another space that's more collaborative competition. I know that may sound like an oxymoron, but there are games out there that are not about winning and losing. Like yoga, there's no such thing as competitive yoga. And yet it's a sport. I think it would be considered a sport, wouldn't it?
Is yoga a sport? I think that the performance matters, but I think performance can be confused with zero-sum competition. And I think for a younger generation, zero-sum competition isn't what's attractive to them. The idea that you can improve your performance and reach new heights is still a very appealing idea. And obviously, it's at the heart of what, a brand like Nike has been around for a long period of time. It's when you really start saying second place is first loser. I think those are the types of things that can be quite alienating. And like the highest growth areas in sport are things like cycling and rock climbing. They come from lower bases. They are performance-based sport. Like if you look at something like rock climbing, it's very interesting because it's almost structured like a video game. You can go at your own pace. There's different levels to it. You can keep pushing yourself and you can decide at your own pace how you navigate the different levels. And there's a general community around it that's supportive and encouraging. Everyone's on their own kind of path and journey. To be clear, that's coming at a very, very lower base than, professional football, soccer. But those are the high growth areas.
Yeah, it's such an interesting shift, from this kind of I win, you lose to how do we all win or how do we push each other? The Latin root of the word competition is competere, which is a verb that means to strive together.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. So competition is this idea of we strive together, we push each other so that we both get better at this. And I've always loved that idea much more so than cutthroat competition, because if I win and you lose, I'm not striving with anybody anymore. I've got no one to push me.
It sometimes gets labeled as woke nonsense or something, but it is the way the majority of kids feel. So I think it's important. And so if you look at like kids, particularly below the age of 12, comparison is miserable. Because if you think about it, it's so brutal, that lifestyle in middle school, famously. There's so much going on that's so difficult for them already. They're already being ranked in so many different types of ways. They're getting graded all the time. So then in their spare time, in their leisure or enjoyable time, to now say, you are going to be comparatively ranked with all the kids in another way, in a way that might not be favorable to you. Or the nations with the highest sport participation, which include like Norway, got rid of ranking systems under certain age brackets, like particularly under the age of 12. And they're like, just let them get to the joy first. If they can just find the joy for the sport, you'll get big numbers through, and then a smaller group of those will come through into elite competition. But what's happened in the States particularly is the opposite. Like elite competition practice has gone younger and younger and younger. And it's really reshaped, high school and middle school sport in America. And it's pushed kids out, So this isn't a new woke idea. It's actually in some ways returning sport in America back to its origins. And this sort of hyper competitive behavior too early Like, obviously, by the time you're competing for a World Cup or gold medal, you need that mindset. But if you push it to too many kids too early, you just push kids out of sport. And that's a big part of what's happening.
Oh, that's fascinating.
I'll tell you who else has done it, the NBA. The NBA was one thing that's been very cautious about having kids ranked under the age of 12 because they just want them to learn the joy of basketball first.
Oh, interesting. Now, before we get into the speed round, what is the secret to happiness personally?
So I lived in America for 10 years and moved to Europe 6 years ago. And, I live in Amsterdam these days. And it is, what's great about here is just, it's not about complicated things. It's just like there is a lovely park bench very close to my home overlooking a canal where you can read a book, And I'm like, if I can get like 20 minutes of that into my week somewhere, I'm happy. I really don't need much. And you know what it's like, modern working life, sometimes it can strip out those tiny little things that are actually the difference between feeling good and feeling bad.
So taking those little moments to rejuvenate yourself.
I know it sounds very cheesy, but I really do think it's sometimes the difference between when you feel burned out, which we've all got to within this industry, and that's actually just feeling like you're in a pretty good place. Sometimes you just need a bit of a breath,
Absolutely. That's great advice. All right. We're going to go into the speed round. It's everybody's favorite. We'll start with an easy one. What's your favorite Olipop flavor?
I will go vintage cola.
What's your favorite word in English, Dutch, or any other language?
The nickname for Amsterdam is Mokum, or one of Amsterdam's nickname is Mokum, which means sanctuary, which I've always loved, and I've found it to be very true.
And how do you spell that word? Mokum?
Mokum. For anyone that visits here, you'll see it around. You'll see like boats branded, like Mokum boat tours and things like that, So it's an affectionate nickname for Amsterdam, but I think it's Hebrew, but it's certainly from the Jewish community, and it comes back from the days of this, being a sanctuary for Jewish people. But I think this city can be a sanctuary for lots of different types of people as well. It can have a beautiful effect.
That's lovely. What was your favorite subject in school? History.
History was debate, really. We didn't have debate in the UK schooling system, so history was great because it was just like, here's the facts. What do you think was really going on? And I loved that. I always loved trying to conceptualize facts, figure out the underlying meaning.
So my daughter doesn't really enjoy history that much, but she loves Hamilton, maybe because it's in song form. Do you have any recommendations that I should take back to her to kind of spark that interest in history?
Well, Hamilton is a great place to start. I've seen that play 5 times already, I think. To me, that's a play about ambition. And every time I've seen it at different stages of my life, and I get very different things out of it. But what they did so well, and I think sometimes what history misses is, the characters aren't statues, right? These were rebels. And I think sometimes that's what the telling of history misses a bit, isn't it? Real life sense of characters.
I love that idea that they're not just statues; these were rebels.
Yeah, that's what one of the things I think was so good that they brought to life. They were fighting with each other, and they had extreme views, and of course they did. They were revolutionaries.
If you were talking to a 5-year-old, how would you describe what you do?
Being a nerd for a living.
All right, and what does it mean to be a nerd?
Get to read about stuff that you don't know about. To me, that's fundamentally still the job. Like I always said to young strategists, if you don't enjoy reading, I just don't know if this is for you, because you've just got to throw yourself into topics and absorb as much as you can. And the job is at its best, I think, where it throws you into different subject matter, and I think so you've got to really have that real passion for learning and reading. To me, just underpins being good at the job.
Yeah, one of my favorite things about the job that I try to tell my kids about and other people about is I get to ask people questions about all kinds of things that I normally, in polite society, let's say, I wouldn't necessarily be able to ask them those questions. But if you're carrying a clipboard and you ask those questions, people will tell you all kinds of things, or in a focus group setting or in some sort of research context. So it's a great way to learn about all kinds of things that you never knew about and connect the dots between diverse, disparate things that you never realized were connected.
Everything's interesting. I've been fortunate to work on some very trendy and fashionable brands like Nike, but daily pay is so interesting to me. How people get paid, the nature of what it means to be a blue collar worker. I think you just got to have that passion for learning about things that you don't know about, and trying to get your head around it from other people's perspective, and that's very fun. You got to get your kicks out of that, I think, fundamentally.
What's the most recent good book you've read overlooking that canal? Or if not a book, what's a movie or TV show that you've watched that you said, oh, this is unbelievable. Everybody should see this?
Right now, I exclusively read novels. Novels are my escape now. I don't want to do anything that in any way develops me or helps me with performing my job. So it's my escape. There's a writer called Kazuo Ishiguro, who's the guy that wrote Remains of the Day. It's his most famous, but he's a British writer with a Japanese heritage. He's just one of my favorite writers in the English language. And I've sort of slowly made my way through pretty much his entire collection. I read a book called Never Let Me Go that he wrote, but he's sort of famous for characters remembering what happened and telling you. Reliable narration that sort of misdirects, and they just kind of take you through these different ways. But every book he's ever written is amazing. I would strongly recommend it. Never Let Me Go is an excellent book, and just completed that one. Would strongly recommend to anyone.
What's a subject that you recently got super interested in and you just went down a rabbit hole because of insatiable curiosity? Not because it was related to work, but because you were like, what is this all about?
I think the origins of piri piri sauce was one that we just kind of came up with. And I don't know if it's insatiable curiosity, but a combination of insatiable curiosity and having a debate with someone, because there's this famous fast food chain in the UK called Nando's, which I don't know if you've heard of, but it's sort of, in some markets, brands itself as Portuguese, and some markets brands itself as Portuguese African. They serve piri piri chicken, which is a sort of Portuguese national dish. But anyway, there's this big debate about, is piri piri really Portuguese or African in origin, or a mixture of the both? And, I think so much of my learning has stemmed from pub debates like that, I think, where you're like, I need to get to the bottom of piri piri sauce, so.
What did you find?
It is a mix. My fundamental argument was, I don't believe that those chilies came from Portugal, like there's no precedent in the Portuguese diet. And it was probably a product of empire, if you like, sort of somewhat of a collaboration between a culture occupying another. Nando's is building itself on top of an actually extremely emotive political fault line.
Mm-hmm. Well, food is a history lesson.
One of the things that I found, so there's 2 Nando's restaurants, I think, in the States. And we visited one. This is embarrassing because Nando's is not a very aspirational brand, but we visited one in Washington, D.C. And one of the things was it was branded African. It got beautiful branding in the store, And so that was actually one of the first bits of genesis for this debate. I was like, that's actually so interesting, the decision they've made around that.
It reminds me of when interviewing Gordy and Brian from Quality Meets Creative. They were talking about doner kebab and bringing doner kebab to the United States. Nobody really knows what doner kebab is here in the United States, and the way that it's branded in the UK and in Dubai, there's, Lamborghinis and just all this over the top stuff. And they're like, that's never going to fly in the United States. You need a totally different approach. And so they did that. And so it's interesting when brands try to jump the pond or come to a different country, they say, well, this is the way we're going to play it.
Branding the doner kebab in the States is a pretty interesting. Everyone puts everything in a taco in America now, don't they? If you want someone to try it, put it in a taco.
Yes, some sort of tortilla. But the wrap, it's everywhere. It's funny when something's in a tortilla, it's maybe considered a little less healthy. But if you put it in a wrap, it suddenly went up by a few health points, didn't it?
I had a friend, still one of my best friends. He grew up in Manchester where they have Indian style kebabs, but you're talking, freshly baked naan bread, a real proper tandoor oven, like there's a lot of artisan craft. And he's like, why is the moment you put it in a sandwich that it gets less respect? He's like, if that was just served on a plate, people would be like, that's a beautiful thing. But the sandwich just limits its potential in people's minds. And he's always very passionate on this topic, but I agree with him.
It's fascinating stuff. Is there a brand whose work you really admire or that you think to yourself, oh, that's so good, I wish I'd come up with that?
We do a lot of work within different types of the startup CPG space, and things like that. So tons of great brands, but I love ones like Dude Wipes, which I don't know. They had a big acquisition fairly recently. But I just kind of love because it's like it's just baby wipes rebranded for grown men. But it's true. It's just like they came on this thing being like, why shouldn't grown men be using moisturizer to clean their butt? And so it's a brave sort of just realization that some of the fundamentals of branding were just missing here. Things were being, wrongly positioned. And then they got the fundamentals. They've had all types of fun with it. I think like bottomless confidence was like one of my favorite lines. But there's all types of great fun that they've had with it. And they've big success just from realizing someone had just really got the emotive factors wrong in a market.
No, that's a great example. What's one of the most interesting jobs you had before you got into the work you do now that has helped you do your job better?
Well, so I had a gap year after university, and then, went straight into the industry. But the gap year lasted 3 years. And in it, I did all types of stupid stuff, which included like I was an au pair in France. And by the way, the full French name for au pair is jeune fille au pair, like young girl au pair. So like I was very fortunate. I was in Beirut, which if you don't know, it's a seaside. It's a beautiful seaside town. It's one of the surf capitals of Europe. Working as a jeune fille au pair. And it's like everywhere I go, they'd be like, what do you do? I'm like an au pair. And they'd be like, you're a young girl au pair? I'd be like, I'm a young girl au pair. But so I did all this sort of random stuff. It was just such a great life experience. Same as everyone, I'm from somewhere quite limited, right? I'm from a tiny corner of England that had a limited life experience, very little experience of any form of diversity. I did 3 years of living in sort of New York, France, and Amsterdam. And it just sort of really opened my eyes to the world. I do think kids being able to have that space for emotional and social development, as well as just seems like the whole podcast industry is focused on hustle culture and every minute of your day being optimized. But when you're still in your 20s, you need those bits of emotional and social development, and they come in different ways. And all of that stuff was really important for me in terms of finding myself as a happy, healthy, functioning adult,
Well, I was never an au pair, but I was a dog walker in Boston for one day. And then I thought, I think I can do more than pick up after Fifi and write in people's diaries about how she did on her walk today. And so I traded that in for, some photojournalism and some writing stuff.
All those types of jobs are, very formative. For the record, I loved being an au pair. It was great. The kids were great. We had a great time. It was awesome.
Yeah, no, that sounds wonderful. Last question. What's a piece of advice that you got early on in life or in your career that you still remember to this day or that you think of often?
I think the best piece of advice I got was your job's to get your client promoted. It's very practical advice. When I first came in, I was very academic. I really was deep on theory and putting insights on a pedestal in many ways. And I needed to really just fundamentally reset and be like, it is their business. You have to start with where they are at. And that includes, this individual sat in front of you as a human being who wants to get promoted. I think it took me a while to believe that feedback, to wrap my head around it, but to really just sort of take seriously what's going on with your clients, because we still work in a service-based business. The folks that don't do that don't go very far. Hey, I think for any strategist, you've got to stay grounded in that truth still.
Well, I feel like I've been promoted to what title I don't know. But having this conversation with you today makes me feel elevated, makes me feel promoted, makes me feel happier for having done it. So, Mark, I really appreciate you taking the time, sharing your thoughts, your processes, and your insights. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's been lovely chatting to you as well.
Thanks again to our guest, Mark Lester from Squint. If you want to connect with Mark, you can find him on LinkedIn. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast platform and share it with colleagues and clients who could use some inspiration. Just send them a link and say, "You see, this is what I'm talking about. Insights." If you're looking for even more ideas and aha moments, head over to chriskochek.com. There you can find some of my newest online courses, case studies, and creative exercises. You can even sign up for one of my hands-on workshops where I show you firsthand how to build effective insights faster. The workshops are great for helping with new business pitches and for creating culturally contagious campaigns. Special thanks to Megan Palmer for editing, sound mixing, and production support. Until next time, keep looking for patterns, finding contradictions, and asking what if more often.